In this video, we'll continue our journey along the Chicago Great Western Rail from Chicago to Oelwein, Iowa, visiting all of the disused stations along the way. This time we'll take the Dubuque and Iowa Heritage Trails to visit Dubuque's second Chicago Great Western station at Fairground, then pass through Sageville on our way northwest to Durango, a once thriving mining community that rivaled Dubuque. And as always, we'll explore railroad artifacts of interest along the way.
In our previous video, we left off at the Dubuque main station, which had been located just off of 8th Street and Elm Street, where today stands U.S. Highway 151, the Great River Road. The next station along the way to Oelwein was Fairground, a little over 2 miles to the north of Dubuque's main station, which back in the day was at the very northern edge of Dubuque. Not surprisingly, the Chicago Great Western right-of-way has changed significantly since abandonment in the 1970s. However, you can follow the general path of the trackway along alleyways, Elm Street, and Pine Street heading north. In fact, we'll pick up the trail of the CGW former right-of-way at 22nd Street, where lies the trailhead for the Dubuque Heritage Trail, which follows the old CGW right-of-way, and which ties directly into the Iowa Heritage Trail 3.5 miles to the north. From here, you ride north through residential neighborhoods, as well as a few industrial parks. The railroad line went directly down the middle of Elm Street. North of 26th Street would have been multiple industrial sidings to the west or left of the trackway. After a little over a mile, we reached 32nd Street, or Peru Road, just beyond which the Chicago Great Western's Fairground Station, as well as its roundhouse and shops, were once located.
The Fairground station was literally located in the north shadow of Peru Road, where the trackway passed under a substantial wooden bridge that carried the road overhead. The station was located not too far from the maintenance shed that now stands guard just outside the fenced-in area to the north, where the Chicago Great Western Rail Yard once stood.
The Fairground Station was a modest-sized wood-frame building with clapboard siding, about 20 feet wide by 20 feet long, with gable ends. A shed extension came out of the southwest corner of the building, protruding by about 5 feet and with a length of 10 feet. This bay extension was covered with windows for visibility looking to the north and south along the railroad line.
The station itself seemed to have only sporadic use as a passenger and freight station in the early days of the railway, the Fairground facility being used primarily as a division point between Oelwein, Iowa and Chicago. A large roundhouse and associated shops, coal sheds, and water tanks all filled a large rail yard to the west and north of the station. 3 long sidings stretched more than a half-mile northward from Peru Road. But the Chicago Great Western was never fully satisfied with Dubuque as a division point, because it created a large asymmetry between the work crews that piloted the trains along the Oelwein to Chicago route, with the Dubuque to Chicago crews working longer hours at a higher rate of pay, which cost the company substantial money. As early as 1899, Chicago Great Western officials were threatening to pull the division point out of Dubuque, taking with it many good jobs from the community.
As such, initially the Fairground Depot was used mainly for special events, or for seasonal usage, as transportation to and from baseball games, horse racing events, boxing matches, and general civic fairs. Not until the early 1930s does the station appear on train schedules with any regularity, where it then remained until the 1960s.
With Dubuque's loss of the division point to East Stockton in the 1910 timeframe, much of the land for the rail yard, roundhouse, and maintenance sheds, 250 acres in all, was sold to the Brunswick Ball Colander Company, which manufactured sports and recreational equipment and furnishings, such as billiard tables, bowling equipment, saloon furnishings, toilet seats, and phonographs. They opened a substantial factory here in 1911, very likely demolishing the former CGW roundhouse and shops that had previously stood here from the late 1880s onward. However, in spite of losing the division point, the Fairground facility and rail yard still maintained a locomotive turntable, water tanks, and coal sheds well into the 1930s.
As the Dubuque factory had much to do with the making of phonographs, this part of the Brunswick factory was eventually sold to Warner Brothers Studios in 1930. Dubuque Corrugated Box Company and General Dry Batteries also opened up manufacturing plants in this section of land. However, much of this industrial property was sold to the Flexsteel Company in the 1930s, which manufactured home and office furnishings. They opened a large factory here in 1936. Flexsteel had a long, successful run, being one of the largest employers in the area for multiple decades. However, they finally closed their Dubuque plant in 2020, turning over much of the property to the city of Dubuque. Only within the past few years has much of this industrial property been cleared of the former factory buildings, as the city ponders its future use.
The origin of the Fairground station name appears to come from the general term for the area that it served, especially to the north of the station, where there once stood large open areas, initially used for recreation and special events. The Dubuque Driving Park, a horse racing facility, opened here in 1865, to the south of present-day John Deere Road and east of Cooler or Central Avenue. This was a half-mile horse racing track, with the grounds consisting of 24 acres.
In 1892, the park was purchased by Frank D. Stout, who greatly augmented the size of the facility to almost 100 acres, while changing its name to Nutwood Park as an homage to his favorite prize-winning racing stallion. Horse racing flourished here in the 1890s, with many major races held, attended by thousands of spectators. Professional baseball, a sport which was quickly embraced by Dubuque, saw many games played on its expansive grounds, also attended by large crowds. However, horse race attendance fell off in the first decade of the 20th century, and a failed major sweepstakes in 1912 due to bad weather and flooding dampened the park's prospects thereafter.
Within a few years, in 1917, the large open area was converted to an airfield for the fledgling aviation industry. It remained as such until the 1930s, when Dubuque created a brand new and much larger airport to the southwest of the city. One other intriguing note and less tangible relic of the Chicago Great Western is the Maple Leaf subdivision to the immediate east of the former CGW rail yard. The name may be an arboreal coincidence, or it may refer to the Chicago Great Western's nickname, the Maple Leaf Route, which was used frequently around the time of the subdivision's creation in the waning years of the 19th century.
The next station along the line is Durango, 5.9 miles northwest along the railway. To get there, we'll continue our journey by bicycle along the Dubuque Heritage Trail for a little over 2 miles to Sageville. At Sageville, we'll find the trailhead for the Iowa Heritage Trail, which takes up where the Dubuque Heritage Trail leaves off and continues along the former Chicago Great Western right-of-way. The 26-mile Iowa Heritage Trail first came about as a rails-to-trails conversion in the 1980s, aided by federal and state grants, as well as donations by hundreds of citizens. As with all rails-to-trails conversions, it takes a great deal of effort and dedication by volunteer citizens and local, state, and federal government agencies to bring it to fruition. These rails-to-trails byways are a public treasure, and we will always be grateful to the communities that had the foresight and dedication to create them.
We should note, too, that there is a nominal fee for riding the Iowa Heritage Trail at $2 per person per day, or $25 per year for a family pass. This money goes towards maintaining the trail and for amenities such as signage and bicycle maintenance depots. Check their website for the latest information and for methods of payment.
we head out of Sageville, continuing on the Iowa Heritage Trail north and west. After a little over 1.5 miles of riding, we encounter one of the many old Chicago Great Western steel bridges to be found along this trail. As we'll see, the Iowa Heritage Trail is chock full of railroad bridges between Sageville and Dyersville, more than 20 in all. This particular bridge is a steel plate through girder bridge and passes over the Little Maquoketa River. It has a span of more than 200 feet, supported by 2 midstream piers and 2 abutments. Most of the CGW bridges along this trail were built in the first few decades of the 20th century.
However, the Iowa Heritage Trail also features a much older bridge along the pathway, a surviving remnant of the historic Dunleaf and Dubuque Railroad Bridge, the history of which we explored at length in our previous Chicago Great Western video. This span no longer functions as a bridge per se, but now serves out its days as a historic landmark and quiet sanctuary along the nature trail, a few hundred feet west of Clay Hill Road.
Recall that the western approach of the Dunleaf-Dubuque Bridge was a bridge system unto itself, with several wooden trestles that passed over waterways and sloughs, from the banks of Dubuque to the Mississippi River Islands, where the Dunleith and Dubuque Railroad Bridge spanned across the Mississippi River. These wooden trestles were replaced with iron truss spans in 1872. As the sloughs and waterways were infilled over time, these iron trestle spans were no longer needed, and many of them were sold off to be used as bridges elsewhere. One of these bridge spans has been preserved to the present day, situated just a few hundred feet west of Clay Hill Road. This particular span was sold off in 1889, and then used over the Little Maquoketa River until 1992, when it was finally replaced and moved to its current location along the Iowa Heritage Trail. It's a remarkable surviving artifact, more than 150 years old, from the early days of Dubuque railroading.
As we continue westward, you can generally feel the land rising on a nominal grade as you ascend out of the Mississippi River Valley. Here the trail and former trackway runs parallel with Iowa Route 3, which lies to the north of the trail, meandering along the Little Maquoketa River Valley. Where the trail starts to depart from the road bending to the south, we find the former Durango station site, which stood to the southeast of the former trackway.
The Durango station was located on the south side of the trackway, on the inside of the curve, about 250 feet north of Burton's Furnace Road, and a little more than 200 feet southwest of Iowa Route 3. The station was a two-story wood-frame building, about 32 feet long by 16 feet wide, with a gable-ended roof. A two-story wooden porch came off the back of the building. A 3.5-foot bump-out came out of the front of the building, about 7 foot wide, with windows on 3 sides, for better visibility of the trackage and rail yard. A few sidings extended in front of the station to the west of the main line, between the roadway and the trackway.
The station was one of the original stops along the Chicago to Olwine route, appearing on timetables from 1888 onwards. A terrible accident occurred here in December of 1889, when 2 freight trains collided, destroying 1 engine and 7 loaded freight cars, killing the conductor, Barry, on one of the trains, and the fireman, John Hickley, on the passing train.
The station remained a fixture on train timetables until at least 1949. In early 1950, there were not 1 but 2 major train derailments just to the east of Durango, occurring within 1 month of each other. The first was in early February, when 44 freight cars carrying livestock crashed off the track due to a broken rail. The second occurred in early March. This time, 27 cars piled up at the very same location, again due to a defective rail. Apparently, someone didn't get the memo. Fortunately, there were no major injuries as a result of either of these accidents.
In the final years of operation in the 1950 timeframe, the original station was demolished and replaced with a small wood frame structure about 7 feet wide by 20 feet long. From 1952 onwards, the Durango station no longer appeared on CGW timetables, although people could usually flag down the train to board here, at least until 1956.
Another fine example of a Chicago Great Western Bridge lies less than 500 feet south of the former Durango Depot, passing over the Little Maquoketa River, just to the south of Burton's Furnace Road and the spacious Durango Heritage Trail parking area. The plate-through girder bridge, built in 1913, has a span of about 200 feet, supported by 2 midstream piers.
The town name, Durango, suggests a town straight out of a spaghetti western. You almost expect to see desperados, wearing ponchos and gun holsters, smoking small cigars, greeting you at the train station. In fact, the name Durango is a Basque Spanish term meaning water town, or well-watered place, which is apropos since the town sits along the Little Maquoketa River and has seen some flooding over the past century.
In fact, the community of Durango has deep roots and was once a serious rival to Dubuque to the southeast during the rough-and-tumble mining days of the 1830s. Durango is on the northwest quarter of Julian Dubuque's mines of Spain, and lead mining was started here as early as the 1820s. The place was then known as the Mine of the Maquoketans, then as the Timber Diggings. Nurtured by the promising lead mines, a boomtown sprang up, with 30 to 40 houses, a few general stores, and a handful of groceries, which at that time included saloons.
By mid-1836, we find the earliest references to Durango and the Durango mines, which was then part of Wisconsin Territory, in regional newspapers. A U.S. post office was opened there in 1850, putting a further stamp on the community name. But as the mines tapped out and nearby Dubuque rose to prominence, the ambitious village never grew beyond its initial promising start.
The arrival of the Chicago Great Western Railroad in 1887 did provide a modest stimulus to this rural community. But maps of Durango from the 1890s and early 1900s indicate no more than a dozen buildings within the vicinity of the station. In spite of the loss of the Chicago Great Western some 50 years ago, the quiet community of Durango has withstood the changes of the 20th century and has persisted into the 21st. Its resilient population, only a few of which might be desperados, hovering at about 50 residents.
If you're enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. It helps our channel to grow and enables us to make more videos like this. In our next video, we'll continue onwards along the Iowa Heritage Trail to Bud, Twin Springs, and places beyond. But that is a story for another day. We'll see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.